Well, I just got Sarah text Erica and asked if Joey and Timmy could stay in here with me because they were interested in the subject, or if they had to go to kids' church, so I didn't really. Yeah, it might be. Those happen occasionally. Hey, guys. I don't have to do much. What's up, pal? How you doing? Good. You? Good. Good. Good to see you. Hi, girls. Miss Erica's here. She'll take you right in the nursery. Hi. Can you hear my voice come over the speakers? Isn't that fun? Come here. You want to say something? Talk right here into this thing. Blah, blah, blah. See that? Come on. You want to check it out? Come on. Here, I'll take it off. You want to put it on? Or just talking it like this? Hello. You try. Hello. You. Say hello. You.
Hello.
There you go. Good job. If you're going to pay attention. If you're coming in here to play around with Joey and Timmy, the answer is no. I'm not. Well, you better pay attention. Hey, Jan. Right, Kate, Carson. Leave those for the adults for now, okay? They're on the chair, Jan. You want to get at them?
Okay, just a quick question.
Let me turn this off. via digital. And the way this is, like, what you have there in the packet, I edit it some so that we can have a little more discussion in some of it. But we also dig out some of the details, things that I think are interesting or would maybe shift your perspective a little bit, or they inform kind of the culture of what's happening. I like digging that stuff out because I think it helps, like watching people, new or old believers, either way. A lot of times, even older believers, they don't know the history or culture of what's going on around the times. When you understand that, and then you read the Bible, you go, oh, that's why, that makes a lot more sense. Like, you get what I'm saying? So that's a lot of what this is kind of diving into that. And it's interesting, like the first series of foundations that was done was really aimed at the believer in general, where it's a foundations, but it's really it's a shot looking at the life of Jesus all the way through, like 12 different kind of peaks at things. So it's interesting, kind of looking at the differences between the two Bible studies. And I haven't looked at, I've looked over 2 lessons for this, so I don't have a real good comprehension of the whole thing yet. So we'll see how it goes. But I'm confident in the material because I know the people that put it together. It's going to be a good study. I have never gone. Now, my buddy who wrote this and is going to be coming here in April, he's like begged me to go a couple times with him. But, it's expensive, and I haven't gone. Now, Jim Stoll went with him to, I think it was 21, he went with him. And he was supposed to go to Israel, and then COVID happened. So then Jim ended up going on a trip to Turkey with Jeremy, who did this. It was right after we did the Bible study, so Jim was kind of there with the bigwigs and of the AG and all these guys that went on that trip, which was kind of funny. They were like, "And where do you pastor?" And Jim's like, "I don't," It was pretty funny, and so then I know he went with a different group later to Israel for whatever, but yeah. Yeah. Things are smaller or bigger, It's always interesting. Jay, the guides are there on the chair. Do you want one? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, see, when he wanted me to go before all that, we were talking like $3,500. It's a costly trip. So, yeah, I have friends that have gone and they've gotten baptized and there, and that's probably, if I ever got baptized again, that's probably the only place I would do it, would be there. Yeah, that's it. I wouldn't do it anyplace else. Yeah. Are you talking to me, Erica? What? Yeah, it's on. It's been on for 10 minutes. We're giving people time. Relax. Yeah. Yep, it is. Turn the power amps on in there. No, what? She's got the girls in there. No. She hasn't got to get Caleb till 7:30. She's got to go pick him up. He has late basketball practice, so she might come tap you on the shoulder. Just go and sit down. She just got to run up to the school, grab him, and she's coming right back, and then you can come back in. But yeah. Well, Riley didn't even go to school because he's sick. He was like stomach ache last night after the game, and I guess he had, diarrhea or whatever all night long, and poor dude. I'm going to shut that door. We'll be right back. We'll get started. For all of you, there's a bunch of people watching already. I'm like, we'll get to it, guys. We're just giving everyone some time to get settled. This 6:30 time has got people thrown still. We made this adjustment a while ago, and everyone's just kind of like, they start rolling in at 20 of or a quarter of, and they're like, oh, thought it was 7. I'm like, nope. Yeah, there's already 8 or 9 people online watching, so some of you, I know you should be here, so I don't know what's going on tonight. Jane, I know you said you were going to be out of town, so. We'll get rolling at about 37. So, guides are right there in the chair, Anita. Yeah, we went through some ink printing those, Jayette. Yeah, I did front and back pages because otherwise it would have been a mountain of paper. That would have been 72 pages. So, yeah, essentially. We're going to give everyone 2 more minutes, and we'll get rolling. If you guys want to, we'll get a little preliminary here. Open it up to page 4. You'll see a map of Israel. A lot of the places that it's going to talk about are going to be on there. Also, page 5, it kind of tells you the Center for Holy Land Studies. That's who has made this Bible study, kind of what their mission is. So I'll read through that so everyone kind of has a base level of what we're doing. Welcome to Foundations, the Life of Jesus. This is page 5. Through this 12-session video and study guide series, we will dive into the New Testament time period to understand more about the world, life, and teachings of Jesus. We'll study his birth, his family, his beliefs, and his teachings, as well as his journey to the cross and resurrection. Jesus was born into and lived in a specific time and place. By unpacking the many aspects, we will uncover even further the life and teachings of Jesus. The impact it will have on your study will be tremendous, and will be giving you your education, devotion, and faith. The Center for Holy Land Studies wants all believers to understand the Bible and grow in their faith and love for God. Our hope is that through this series, you will continue to discover a deeper understanding of what is said in the Bible and what its authors meant and how to apply it to your life today. The Center for Holy Land Studies specifically incorporates the following method to uncover the stories and lessons in the pages of the Bible. Number 1, they use culture. Discover in original context how the culture and language of the biblical story are interwoven in ancient society and daily life. Number 2, they use history. Find out what was said and done and what was meant by it in the biblical and historical context. Number 3, land. See geographic landscapes come to life, allowing the land to have its own narrative in Scripture and in the biblical story. It is as much a character itself as any person in the text. And I want to echo that for those of you watching, those of you here. The geography a lot of times when it talks about Jesus going from one place to another, crossing the Sea of Galilee, or how, when they're talking about this stuff, the geography means a lot, and when you actually understand the geography, it deepens what you're reading. And then the last part that they do this study in, or the spirit they do it in, is spirit. Explore the common beliefs of the biblical time period and how the spiritual climate impacts our understanding of the story. So there's a lot that goes into this. Very educational. I think we were just coming off of 5 weeks of really faith-driven, prayer life kind of thing, and now this is going to be quite a bit more educational. One of the things I'll say for our church is a standpoint of every believer in the church, we want you to understand the Bible. We want you to be able to read it and mine or dig out of it what it's actually saying. And this study and things like this study give you the ability to do that and really have a better understanding of it. So if you want to flip over to page 6, that's where we're going to begin on the birth of Jesus. We're going to do a little bit of teaching, and then we'll put the video up for everyone to see. Okay? So starting at top of page 6, it says the life of Jesus, the birth of Jesus. So obviously, when we're going to take these kind of 12 lessons on the life of Jesus, whether it's his birth, his baptism, and it goes on and on throughout it, we're going to start at the birth of Jesus. So not long after Jesus' ascension, the book of Acts records Peter boldly preaching, "There's salvation in no one else. God has given no other name under heaven by which we must be saved." Okay? So, kind of the first paragraph on page 6, and bear with me because I know you guys have a guide, but I've underlined some things. I'm going to tell you things I want you to underline and things I want you to know for it. Okay? But let's read the first paragraph. As believers, we wholeheartedly accept this claim that salvation comes through Jesus alone. But do we know why we believe it? Are we simply following Jesus blindly, or are we growing in our walk with him? When we seek to better understand Jesus' earthly life and ministry, we become more like him and are able to participate in his ongoing work. Now, in that next paragraph, I want you to hop down a few lines, really toward like maybe the last sentence in the second paragraph. And it says this: only by unpacking biblical narratives in their context can we begin to grasp the culture, the history, the landscape, and the spiritual climate to which Jesus lived. All right? So we were just talking about this a minute ago, but I want to ask this question to all of you. Why would it be important for us to understand the culture, the history, the landscape, and the spiritual climate of that time? Why, of the biblical times? Why is that important for us? Roger says, otherwise we're only understanding it from our point of view. Okay? Anybody else? Nikolai says, because it helps interpret what we're reading. When you talk about interpret, let's get into that a little bit. When you talk about interpretation, okay? Interpretation is a massive thing when we're talking about the Bible, right? So I want to make this very clear so everyone understands. There's a big distinction between a translation and an interpretation. Everyone get that now? A translation is something is translated, and that's either properly translated or it's not. There can be small variation in it, but it should not change the meaning. Interpretation will change the meaning. Everyone get what I'm saying now? And so when you're talking about it helps us better interpret the Bible, maybe expand on that a little bit, Nikolai. What do you mean?
I'm just thinking like, when the Pharisees, how did they arise?
So Nikolai said, and I'm going to repeat what you said because you don't have a microphone, they do, right? or they don't. They need to hear the microphone. So Nikolai's talking about it helps like when you read the New Testament and or even the Old Testament, when you read the New Testament, particularly in the life of Jesus, when they're talking about the Pharisees, like, who are the Pharisees? You know what I mean? That's not something that exists now. And when we're talking about the law, are they talking about the Talmud, or are they talking about, the Deuteronomical laws? Like, there's a lot that can mean. And so having a proper understanding of that helps you understand when you're reading about the life of Jesus. Anybody else? I think there's a big word when we're talking about the culture, the history, the landscape, and the spiritual climate. It's called context. Now, context is, we use it when we interpret Scripture, okay? I've told this story before, but I worked with a man who hadn't divorced his wife, but he split from his wife and is living with his girlfriend. And he told everyone in the shop at the paper mill I worked at that he was perfectly justified before God for doing what he did. And his reason for it was a verse out of 1 Corinthians chapter 9 when he says, all things are lawful for me. Okay? He took one half of a sentence and he changed the interpretation to be able to fit in what he wanted. Now, the rest of the story is all the guys in the shop knew that was wrong, even though none of them were believers. And when they found out, and no one really liked this guy, so when they found out I was a Bible college student, they waited until they had a big lunch with all of us in the lunchroom together, and they said, hey, Bill, how about you tell so-and-so, he says that he's totally justified. What do you say? And then he told me the verse in front of the 25 guys that were in the shop, and I got to tell him that the second half of that sentence is, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are expedient for me, okay? But secondly, on top of that, it had nothing to do with relationships, sexual immorality. It was talking about eating clean or unclean meat. That's what the Apostle Paul is talking about in that verse, okay? Yes, so it was so far out of context, but this man took half of a verse and twisted it to mean something that he wants, and it happens all the time. That's why when I tell you interpretation is important, because he was quoting the verse directly, but there was no context, right? He left the context out and just made it mean whatever he wanted to. And I think when we talk about the culture, the history, the landscape, or the spiritual climate of the biblical times, it adds context for us to understand better when we read the Bible what's actually going on, okay? To be honest with you, the fact of understanding the Roman Empire, understanding what the Roman Empire did, how recent their rule over the Jews was, okay? And the fact that the Romans had really just come into power in Israel maybe 20 years before the life of Jesus. So you guys really kind of understand that, you know what I'm saying? It had been less than a generation really where Israel had its own kingdom. So and that's just one example that's going to come out tonight, but does that make you wonder why everyone really was looking for this? There was this Messiah syndrome where they were looking for a Messiah who was going to rise up politically and give them their kingdom back. And that's what everyone was thinking of, and it happened multiple times in the ministry of Jesus, right? So let's go on. Let's read paragraph 3 in total on page 6. It says, let's begin our journey through the life of Jesus as its natural starting point, his birth. The Nativity is one of the most revered events in human history and is still celebrated by billions of people around the world. Recorded primarily in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, Jesus' arrival fulfilled thousands of years of messianic prophecy and set in motion God's plan for redemption for humanity. Now, the very first line, I want you to underline this next line. It's the first line of the fourth paragraph on page 6. Jesus was born at a strategic time in human history. Jesus was born at a strategic time in human history. If you're watching this and you don't have a guide, or you're not, you're from out of town and you're not going to see this, when I will read every line I want people to underline in their study guide. If you have a notebook, I want you to write it down, okay? Jesus was born at a strategic time in human history. And for those of you that didn't understand this, a couple of lines before that, only by unpacking biblical narratives in their context can we grasp the culture, history, landscape, and spiritual climate in which Jesus lived, okay? So, Jesus was born at a strategic time in history. For those of you with a guide, we're going to jump over to page 7. We're going to flip over to the next page, and we're going to start at in the first paragraph at the second line. Underline this, please. The Jews in Israel had seen their 100-year monarchy fall to the Roman general Pompey in 63 BC. The Jews in Israel had seen their 100-year monarchy fall to the Roman general Pompey in 63 BC, landing them under Roman occupation and birthing a movement of messianic idealism. I'll read it from the top again. The Jews in Israel had seen their 100-year monarchy fall to Roman general Pompey in 63 BC, landing them under Roman occupation and birthing a movement of messianic idealism. So, we were just talking about that, how the Jews had been their own kingdom, and there had been multiple rebellions, and not just from the Roman Empire, previous to the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire. And Antiochus Epiphanes had come in and, just a few years before the Romans and, tried to be the Antichrist by slaughtering a swine on the altar in the temple. Like, these are the things that were happening around this time. So there was a lot of tension, okay? And then the Roman Empire comes in and really brings peace to the region, but the Jews, who had had their own monarchy, which was the Maccabees, for those of you that don't know, they had their own kingdom, and because of this Roman occupation and there being such a close transition, there's a lot of this messianic idealism going on within Jewish culture where they're looking for the next king. So it really kind of kicked off for them where they're looking for who was going to rule politically over them, that they would have their own kingdom because of Old Testament prophecies saying that this would happen. Okay? Now, the next line after that, I want you to underline it. The political and religious environment in Israel certainly made daily life difficult and dangerous, but it also set the stage for the Messiah's arrival. All right? I know there's a little bit of a grind to this one, more than the last one, guys, but stay with me, okay? This is good stuff. I want you to go down halfway through the second paragraph on page 7, all right? And at the point where it says, by saying the name Zechariah, you'll see it says, by saying the name Zechariah, Luke chapter 1, verse 13. Guys, there's a study guide on that chair. You can grab one. We're on page 7 right now. So page 7, second paragraph, halfway down, it says, by saying the name Zechariah, Luke 1:13, Gabriel was doing more than addressing the priest by name. He was signifying the fulfillment of prophecy, since the name means the Lord remembers. As far back as Genesis 3:15, God had promised to send one who would redeem humanity. Underline that whole middle phrase that I just said. And I'm going to ask this question, and I want us to have some discussion on it. Why is prophecy so important? Why is prophecy important for Jesus, and why is prophecy still important for us today? Those of you online, I need to hear from you because some of you are more mature saints and you're just not saying nothing. You're being a bump on a pickle. Get motivated, people. Why is prophecy so important? Why was it important for Jesus? Why is it important today? Nobody rushed to get there. Go for it.
God shows his power. I mean, only God can say something's going to happen. Such a precision. Helps you to have faith.
So Nikolai says that it's how God shows his power, and it helps us to believe, have faith and believe in him, right? I think there'd be another way to say that God uses it to verify himself or to verify his word. Would you all agree with me by saying that? Yep. Again, why is prophecy so important for Jesus? So Steve Hosmer says, prophecy fulfilled shows that God always keeps his word and is a testament to your faith that they believed before it came true. True. Yep. That's good, Steve. Now, let me bring a couple of these things together for you guys. Okay? Didn't we just talk about a culture in Israel at the time that had this messianic ideal going on? Yes? Everyone know it? We talked about the Roman Empire coming in, taking over. It hadn't really been all that long since the Jews had their own kingdom, and it was producing in the Jewish people at the time this idealism about a messianic person coming in who was going to take them and have their own kingdom and rule over everything. And so, enter in this idea. It really, when you start reading the Old Testament before this, there's all these prophecies about a Messiah who's going to come. So not only are they having this moment where they want to have their own ruler, but they also have this moment where they feel justified in feeling that way because they have all of these prophecies from the Old Testament. Everyone understand what I'm saying? So there's kind of fuel for the fire, so to speak, in that way. So Linda Frost says, prophecy's telling us what will happen, then later we can look back and see that it happened. Right. Kathy says it proves he's real and that he's God. Yes. So I've said this in church before. Some of you have heard me say it. I'm going to say this again. They did a mathematical formula on the chances of one person fulfilling 8 prophecies of Jesus from the Old Testament in Jesus' time. And what they did was they calculated the chances of 8 prophecies being coincidental. Everyone understand what I'm saying now? All right? So what they found is that it was 1 to 10 to the 17th power. I'm going to give you a mathematic equivalent. Okay? Here comes the mathematic equivalent. It would be like taking silver dollars, pouring them into Texas, 2 feet thick, marking one, mixing it up real good, blindfolding someone, and telling them to pick the right coin on their first chance. That's the probability of one person fulfilling 8 messianic prophecies from the Old Testament into the person of Jesus. And just so we all understand, there's about 303 or 305, I can't remember which, actual prophecies in the Old Testament about Jesus. And he fulfills every single one of them. Okay? So the chances of Jesus being the person is astronomical. They're beyond, silver dollars, 2 feet thick over the state of Texas. I can't even to me, that's like the sand on the shore. Everyone you know what I'm saying? Our mind can't even comprehend that, to be quite honest. So when you break it into math like that, it helps you to understand from a prophetic standpoint, God verifies his word by prophecy. He says, this is going to happen, and then it happens. Okay? Everyone there with me on that? All right. Hop down to the 3rd paragraph on page 7. I'm going to read the whole thing. You don't have to underline it, but we're going to read the whole thing. 6 months after visiting Zechariah. Now, talking about Zechariah and Elizabeth, we're talking about the birth of Jesus, because this is the life of Jesus. We're talking about the birth of Jesus. An angel visits Zechariah to start. Before anything happens with Mary, with Joseph, this all really kicks off with John the Baptist and Elizabeth and Zechariah, okay? So 6 months after visiting Zechariah, the same angel visited a young girl from Nazareth named Mary, who was related to Elizabeth. Once again, Gabriel proclaimed the miraculous birth of a son, although his birth would be even more miraculous than John's. Likely about 13 years old, Mary was a virgin who was betrothed to a virtuous man named Joseph. When Mary revealed the news of her immaculate conception to Joseph, and this is a quote from Matthew chapter 1, verse 19, he did not want to disgrace her publicly, so he decided to break the engagement quietly. Joseph's desire to show compassion and mercy speaks volume about his character. It's no wonder God chose Joseph as Jesus' earthly father, the one who would have been primarily responsible for instructing Jesus in Torah and righteous living. Let's go to the next paragraph we're going to read. Before Joseph could follow through with his plan to break his engagement with Mary, he was visited in a dream by the angel of the Lord who verified Mary's account. The child had been conceived by the Holy Spirit in fulfillment of prophecy. Now I want to stop there for a second and let's talk for real. Okay, let's be real. How many of you have fallen into the trap at times where when you read the Bible, the characters in the Bible seem not really human, or it's hard to see them in a human light because we're talking about time and distance from them? When you read an account like this, okay, let me paint the picture in not so biblical words, but let me paint the picture for you like this. Joseph and Mary engaged to be married. Mary gets pregnant. Now, back then, they didn't live together before that, everybody. It was unrighteous. And so Joseph, understanding that Mary gets pregnant and sees what's happened, because, that happens when you're pregnant, asks her what happened. And she's honest, and she says, God came to me, and I got pregnant. Now, if you're a man, and you're getting married, and your fiancée is pregnant, and you haven't had sexual intercourse with her, and her story to you is this: God spoke to me, the Holy Spirit came to me, and now I'm pregnant. I did not sleep with any other men. How hard would it be to believe that? Yeah. Right? I mean, let's get real here. The Bible's talking about real people, and I think at times we forget that. These are real people with real feelings. And can you imagine? Joseph's probably hurt by this. Now, I will say, betrothal back then, it's a little different than what we do in our Western culture. He was in his 20s, probably his early 20s. She's probably 13, 14 years old, okay? And betrothal worked, it's a much different process. It was arranged marriages. You know what I mean? Now, Eric and I are not in arranged marriage, trust me. Her parents wouldn't have picked me, okay? I'm just letting you know. Erica's looking at me when she's laughing in the nursery while she's watching me, right? Her parents would not have picked me, trust me, all right? It's worked out okay, but they would not have chosen me. The reality is, even though it works different, they're still preparing themselves to be married to this person, and Joseph was a righteous man. And so he's expecting that same kind of righteousness out of Mary. And when that isn't the case, he says to himself, I don't want, because it was law, you could publicly shame them. And what would happen, they would never be able to have any kind of social standing again if he decided to. So instead of that, he was just going to put her away quietly, try and help her save face, and move on with his life. And had every right to according to their customs and laws. And then God has to visit him with an angel. I want to remind us, as we're starting this Bible study, the Bible is full of real people who had real feelings and did bad things just like we do, and did good things because God came into their life just like we do. And it's really hard for us sometimes when we read the Bible to understand that. So let's flip over to the next page, and we're going to get into the video. I'm going to finish the paragraph at the top of page 8. It says, the scripture starting there. It says, "For he will be named Jesus, for he will save his people from his sins." Matthew chapter 1, verse 21. Joseph woke up from his dream and immediately obeyed the angel's directions. He took Mary as his wife, and he cared for Jesus as his own son. Okay, so at this point, we're going to watch the video, and we're going to come back, and there's going to be some discussion on the wise men, and we have a few discussion questions to go through. And remember, this is week 1, so we're going to hit a rhythm with this stuff. I promise I'll be better as we go. But there's a lot of heavy lifting here in the first lesson, just talking about culture and things like that. And so we'll get better as time goes on. But for those of you that are online, I'll put it up there so you can see it too. Just give me a minute, okay?
Shortly after the events of the announcement of the birth of Jesus to Mary, Luke's gospel records that the Roman Empire called a census. This census required each man to return to his home for the purpose of taxation. Although Joseph lived in Nazareth at the beginning of the narrative, Joseph is noted by the opening genealogy of Matthew's gospel to be a descendant of David. The text of the books of Samuel places David's home in Bethlehem. In Leviticus 25:10, we find it stated that even if a family is to sell their property, on every 50th year, the land must be returned to its original owners. As a result, the Gospels show us that the young couple uprooted themselves from Nazareth and relocated to Joseph's ancestral home in Bethlehem. This is where his family would have held property. Unlike many traditional media portrayals of the young couple's journey, one often marked by a very pregnant Mary riding on a donkey on a bumpy road, the text of Luke's gospel seems to place their travel early on into Mary's pregnancy. The distance by road from Nazareth to Bethlehem was roughly 100 miles long and rarely on flat land. This journey would have taken about a week to traverse at an average walking pace. Nevertheless, as carrying a child was far more dangerous of an act in the ancient world than it is today, and no matter how touching Hollywood makes it, it would be nonsensical for Joseph and Mary to have made this journey at the later stages of Mary's pregnancy. It would have severely raised the risk of complications for Mary and Jesus. Instead, though the annunciation of Jesus' birth took place in Nazareth, most of Mary's pregnancy seems to have occurred in Bethlehem. By now, most of us are likely recalling visual pictures from our childhood on how the birth of Jesus played out. Maybe you are considering the question, well, if they were there for so long, why did they need an inn? What about the innkeeper that rejected them, that we've built sermons on over the years? To truly understand the events of the actual day of Jesus' birth, we need to understand the domestic context of the world of the first century in Israel, specifically that of Bethlehem. Through archaeological excavations, we understand that most houses in ancient Bethlehem consisted of 3 rooms. A lower room where household work would take place, a large middle room where most of the household gatherings and meals would ensue, and most importantly, the kataluma, an upper room or guest room, which functioned more so as a multi-purpose room for the house either as a meeting room or a place where guests would stay among them. In Luke 2:7, we often hear, "And she gave birth to a son and wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger, as there was no room in the inn." However, it is in this moment where the text is correct, but the misunderstanding falls on the translators of the Bible. They take it from the original Greek that we find our New Testament in into the modern languages, and it's unknown to us why this room, this kataluma, is translated as inn. In Greek, the actual term for an inn is a pandexion. See, and this word was known to the translators as it appears elsewhere in Luke's gospel. For example, in the story of the Good Samaritan in Luke 10:34. Even more puzzling is that the word kataluma is translated correctly as an upper room in Mark 14:14 and Luke 22:11. By noting this reality of the translation of the text, we see that what Luke is trying to convey is a very different reality than what is traditionally understood by our modern audiences. In fact, it is an altogether different scenario than what we might have been taught from a young age. In the ancient world, the birth of a child was a dangerous act. In a time with high levels of infant and maternal fatality, there would have been as many as possible to assist in the birth of the child, including family members, midwives, and anyone else. The reality is that wherever Mary and Joseph were, whether it be at a family member's house or even Joseph's own house, the kataluma, which would have been the first choice room to be used for the birth, was simply not large enough to hold the number of those present to assist in the birth. In this case, an assumedly larger than average number of family members who would have been present due to the family being there for the census. As Bethlehem sat in a unique geographical location, the houses of Bethlehem contained an aspect that not all homes in Jesus' day shared. They had a larger than average lower level because they incorporated Bethlehem's soft rock cave systems, such as the one I'm standing in, to provide large stables where their livestock would be protected. It would be here where most of the family members could be present and assist Mary to give her and Jesus the best possible chance of survival. Following the conclusion of the birth, the newborn Jesus was placed in the natural cradle, which was already available, a manger, and he was surrounded by those who loved him. Those surrounding Jesus would soon be joined by a group of shepherds who were outside of the village caring for sheep. Traditionally, the medieval understanding of the role of the shepherd has placed these individuals in a negative light, often portraying them as outcasts of society. However, first century sources seem to supply a far different picture. The shepherds, specifically those in Bethlehem nearby Jerusalem, held a vital role in Jewish society, as they were the ones who provided the nearby Temple of Jerusalem with its sacrificial lambs that was needed for the High Holy Days, specifically that of Passover. Most individuals who came to Jerusalem to celebrate could not bring their own lambs the long distances, and instead they needed to buy them from the temple, these lambs that were provided by these shepherds here in Bethlehem. While they were in the nearby fields, Luke records that they were greeted by a heavenly host of angelic messengers proclaiming God's glory and telling the shepherds that the child was the Christ and he would be found wrapped and lying in a manger. But what about the wise men? Where are the magi that Matthew tells us about, who brought their gifts of gold, incense, and myrrh? At this point, they are still roughly 2 years away from their joyful meeting with the young Prince of Peace. Both the Gospels and the Roman historian Suetonius account that these Eastern Magi were actively seeking a sign for the King of the world in the sky. However, the journey would have taken a significant amount of time, estimated to be just shy of 2 years. This is what we believe led to the actions of Herod the Great seeking to kill all the boys in Bethlehem 2 years of age and under. Without a doubt, the wise men were here in Bethlehem, though it lacks the ring in our ears to what we're so used to, thinking that these men came to worship the baby Jesus. Instead, what we see is that they would have come to worship the toddler Jesus, one who probably had just learned to walk on this very ground, but would eventually walk on water and with us in the streets of heaven. Today, the once small village of Bethlehem has been built over to become a bustling modern city, yet the location has never lost the true essence of what it once was, the place where the Word of God became flesh. From the earliest days of the legalization of Christianity in the 4th century AD, Bethlehem has served as one of the most visited sites for Christian pilgrims, with almost 3 million annual visitors today, each of whom come to the city to see the place where the Savior of the world was born. Although the exact location where Jesus was born in the city is truly unknown, the reality of coming here to remember the truth of Emmanuel, God being with us, resonates with each and every one of us every day.
So as we're watching that video, what are some of the first things that you noticed as you guys were kind of watching, seeing some of the architecture, seeing some of the land? What are some of the things that you noticed? Anybody? Say it again, Tim? Yeah, okay, thank you. That's my friend Jeremy. Anybody else notice anything as you're watching that? Go ahead. Yeah, the houses were a lot different. Anybody else? Say it again, Anita. Kind of like caves. Yeah, he talked about how in Bethlehem specifically, there's a lot of soft stone there, and they hollowed them out, and there was natural caves, but they used them for stables, basically. Yeah, go ahead, Joe. What do you mean? Oh, it was, yeah, I think a lot of times we think, they just kind of jumped from Nazareth to Bethlehem. No, it's quite a ways, especially when it's on foot, right? Anybody else? What are some details you might have noticed after watching the video? That she wasn't super pregnant. Kind of at the beginning, yeah. A lot of the pictures we see of the nativity, right? She's 9 months pregnant, and she's on a donkey headed down to, right? Anybody else? It kind of clashes with the nativity sets when they've got the shepherds and the wise men there all at the same time, like we're having one big party on the night of Jesus' birth. Totally different scene. Shepherds were there night of. Wise men didn't come till much later, and we're actually going to get into that here after in the rest of the material. Anybody else? Anything that you noticed from looking at that? Say it again. That they weren't going to be alone at the birth of the baby, right? Right. That's what understanding culture and history of the time does, because it stacks understanding for you. Just some of you are more medically inclined than I am. Sarah, you're a nurse, so it's, back then it would have been a lot more dangerous in having a baby than it is now. You have a baby now, you're getting in the car, driving as fast as possible to the closest hospital, right? That's how that works now, particularly here. That's not how it worked there. They had it in their home, right? And, the whole family kind of shows up for the event. You know what I mean? It's different. My mother tried to come into the delivery room with me and Erica screamed at her and she ran away. So that's my mother's watching. I said that for her benefit tonight. But, it's true. That's what happened. But all I'm saying is, because we have a professional field of it, it's very different Then it was like, it was the whole squad getting together and going, I'll get the hot water, I'll get the this, I'll get the that. It was everyone kind of pitching in to help because they want baby and mom to survive, number one. Number two, they want it as easy as a transition as there can possibly be, right? Anything else anyone notice about this? Houses weren't big. Yeah. Roger says it wasn't the Ritz. Yeah, it wasn't the Ritz. Kathy says the stable looked really different. Like, we think stable, we think barn, especially here, right? We think barn. They're keeping them in caves, Apparently some joke that we said in there, Linda Frost thought was funny because she just posted laugh out loud in the comments. Anybody else? Anything to add on this? Okay, I want you to go to page 8, and we're going to kind of finish some of the discussion here, where it says, hop down to, where it says watch the video, hop down to the second paragraph, the one that's next to the picture, and it says the first kind of few lines, I want you to underline this. According to the Roman historian Suetonius, a ruler of the world, quote unquote, was expected to come from Judea. And many believed his arrival would be signified through the cosmos. Now, here's something you don't hear about, okay? Let's just ask this question. Why would wise men be searching the stars for a Messiah? Go ahead. That's what happened, but why would they have been looking for it? Astronomers, yes. Okay, so now we're getting into it a little bit more. These wise men, or these magi, would be looking for this. Why? History, prophecy, same thing. Okay? You got to remember, everyone, history is built in to a lot of this. So previous to this point in history, the Babylonians had come, destroyed the Jews' kingdom. The final destruction was 586 BC, okay? And most of the Jewish people, if not all of them, were taken in exile to Babylon, which is modern-day Baghdad, in case anyone wants to know, all right, or thereabouts. So now they're in exile out of their own country. And has anyone read the story of Daniel in the lion's den? Anyone have heard Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego before? All Jewish young men that were taken by the Babylonians from their homes in Israel, and because they were thought to be the smartest and the best looking, the Babylonians and the Persians took them and sent them to school. So not only do they have this Persian teaching, but they have Hebrew teaching as well. And so they're bringing all of this in. And Daniel was very well known, and he was basically the prime minister. He was put second in command. And so he's passing a lot of this on as well. He was considered one of the smartest men in the world at the time. And so now here we are 6 centuries later, or 5 centuries later, and these legends have been passed down through, and you've got a Roman historian, a Roman historian who's collected some of these and understands that there's supposed to be a Messiah coming from Judea. And so wise men are looking for this. And remember, wise men came from the east. So they're coming from that whole mentality of Daniel being from Baghdad, being from the Medo-Persian Empire, and these legends are handed down. So now you've got these magi that are already looking for it. Is this starting to fill in some blanks for everyone, and you're starting to kind of see, everyone know what I'm talking about here? Yes, no? I need some response, people. Come on, no? Yeah. All right. So Gary said it was hard to see in the caves. Linda Frost says, they were scholars who had searched writings, prophecy, and this was going to be a great event, and they all wanted to be a part of it. Right. So jump down to the bottom of that second paragraph that we just read in, and it says this, the last it's part of the last short text next to the picture, and then the last 3 lines. It says, it is estimated they traveled from Babylon, the seat of the Magi's power, on a 900-mile journey to Judea, traveling roughly 6 miles a day, the typical range for a caravan. Their journey would have taken at least 150 days. Underline that. Underline that, please. The next paragraph, let's read it. When the Magi arrived in Jerusalem, likely over a year after Jesus' birth, the city was sent into a stir. These prominent men, along with their entourage of attendants and assistants, were an unusual sight in the city. Their eminence gave them direct access to the Roman client king of Judea, Herod the Great, who was Idumean. They unabashedly asked him, "Where's the newborn king of the Jews?" Matthew chapter 2, verse 2. Now, this is where history leaves a lot out, especially when we read the Bible, we don't have context of history. So you need to understand, Judea had a king, okay? He was a puppet king set up by the Roman Empire, and the sad part was he wasn't even really a true Jewish person. Yep. So you have this king of the Jews who doesn't know anything about being Jewish. And so when the wise men come and ask him, he has to ask the scribes and scholars. So that's in the next paragraph. And he says, Herod was asked the chief priests and scribes for an answer to the visitor's question. Quoting the prophet Micah, the religious leaders directed them to Bethlehem. Verse 6, Herod was notorious for coveting power to the point of paranoid delusion. And he instructed the Magi to return to him once they found the child so they could also worship him. But that was not the plan, everybody. Herod wanted, what was it? He wanted to kill Jesus, right. But after they found Jesus in Bethlehem, presented their gifts and worshiped him, the Magi were warned by God in a dream not to return to Jerusalem. Instead, they returned home by another route, thereby protecting Jesus from Herod's fury. We know that story. But here's the context of it. Herod was so paranoid, politically speaking, he craved power so much that he had the soldiers go to Bethlehem and kill every kid, male child, 2 years old and under, to try and erase any ability for anyone to challenge him politically. Now, I want to ask a question, and I hope it leads to some discussion. Beth, I see your question. Is this the same Herod who killed John the Baptist? It is not the same Herod who killed John the Baptist, different Herod. Okay? So, I want to ask this question. Why would God allow this to happen? Say it, Roger. There's a prophecy about Rachel weeping for her children in Bethlehem, okay? Talking about how there would be great weeping in the streets. So yes, there's a prophetic part of it. God called that. But why would he allow it to happen? It was a miracle. It was a miracle that Joseph knew to get out of there and go to Egypt before the axe came down, right? But there's a deeper discussion. Go ahead.
I think it parallels Moses. Like they would have known, hey, Moses, Pharaoh, killed all the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Moses survived, and then he saved the people, so they would know, hey, something similar happened.
So there's a parallel with Moses in that that's true. We actually just read that in Bible reading a couple weeks ago, if you're part of the Bible reading group on the app, is that the Egyptians tried to kill, they realized that the Jewish people were getting too big, and so they started killing the children, and instead of them dying, what one of the customs became was that they would put male children in a basket and send them down the river. So in case any of you want to know, I mean, for us it would be wild to see a baby in a basket come down a stream here, right? We'd be like, what the is going on? You know, we'd call the police, we'd call whoever. But for them, at that point, it was common, which is why Pharaoh's daughter finding Moses was uncommon, or her even showing interest in it was uncommon, because there were other babies that were going down the river in baskets. And I think for us, we hear that story and we go, wow, that's different. No wonder she noticed him. No, it really wasn't, because it happened on a semi-regular basis there. So the fact that she noticed him is definitely God's providence in Moses' life. And this has a parallel with Jesus. I like that. That's good. Anybody else? Why would God allow this to happen? There's a real debate here I'd like us to dip into a little bit. Not at length, but a little bit. Free will versus God's will. Right? Why does God allow that stuff like that to happen? Why does all the baby boys from 2 years old to 0 have to die in Bethlehem at this time? Go ahead, Cars. Out of the mouth of babes. Could God control us? Yeah. Will He? Why? He wants us to choose what? Yeah, He wants us to choose Him and choose what's right. Otherwise, it would never last. You'd have a Garden of Eden all over again, correct? Is everyone following me? You want to say something, Jay? I saw your mouth begin to open. You were going to talk. How easy is it for people in our culture to blame God but don't have anything to do with Him? Well, if God was good, He wouldn't allow that to happen, right? How many of you tried to share Jesus with someone and that's the argument that comes at you? It's happened to me a bunch of times. God is still good, despite whether people are bad or not, because they choose what they do. And in this culture in particular, no one really wants to take personal responsibility for anything, right? Okay? Especially American culture right now. But all of us are responsible for our choices. Some cause sin, some cause things that are good, but the reality is God's not going to strip us of our free will. But the incredible thing about God is, despite Herod being politically paranoid and killing all the baby boys, God still works out His will, even if man's will tries to get in His way. Everyone understand what I'm saying now? God can work out His will. His providence is better than all of it. Let's jump down. Third paragraph on page 9. It says, when Joseph and his family returned to Israel, after yet another angelic dream, they relocated to, and this is just interesting, Mary's hometown. Right. She was from Nazareth. Why did Jesus come from Nazareth? This is where His mom was from. And yes, Roger, it related to prophecy. Do you think the prophet saw that when he prophesied that the hundreds of years before? Who knows? I can't tell you for a fact. Linda Frost says, I hear that lots. He gives us free will. He could control it. She's talking about, if God is so good, why does He allow people to suffer? But like you said, it would be like the Garden of Eden all over again. Yeah. People choosing evil over what is right. Jesus is from His mom's hometown. I got a lot of friends their wives weren't comfortable anyplace else but their hometown. And so where did they move to? Their wife's hometown, okay? I got a buddy of mine, was a real good friend of mine through high school. You know where he lives? His wife's hometown, on a block with her parents because she wouldn't go anyplace else. Does that make sense, everybody? I don't know. I like stuff like this because it gives a context about, and it turns them into real people when we read this, right? Let's jump down in the last paragraph on page 9. Let's see, one sentence in. If you go down on the third line, it says the region of Galilee. So we're going to start there. I want you to underline this. The region of Galilee served as a home of some of Judaism's most pious leaders, also known as sages. Rather than being elected or appointed or chosen by birth like Jerusalem temple leaders, the sages were elevated by the common people. Their holy lifestyles, insightful teachings, and God-given miracles drew many followers who desired to know the Father and His will. Growing up in Nazareth, Jesus walked in their footsteps. He would have known the sages' teachings and witnessed their ministry until His own ministry began. Okay? You can flip over, those are questions. Did anyone know that? That was actually a new one on me. I hadn't read that before, that Nazareth was known for its sages. I thought that's really interesting because what you've got essentially happening, and it would be bad theology for us to say that actually formed Jesus' theological system. Jesus didn't need a theological system. He was God, okay? But it's really interesting that He grew up in the one place that it had nothing to do with church politics, by birth. It was all on people's merit, on their own faith in God and how they lived their lives. Everyone understand what I'm saying now? Okay? Well, there was a lot of, interpretation, translation. You think it's confusing now? Go to back then. It was a mess, all right? But what I'm saying is there were political systems set up in Jerusalem because of the temple, Pharisees, priests, and Pharisees and priests and Sadducees. Pharisees and priests, not the same thing, in case anyone wants to know. Priests were allowed to do the priestly duties in the temple. That doesn't mean Pharisees were. Does everyone understand that? Okay? So Pharisees and Sadducees kind of rose up during the Maccabean time, and particularly after the temple was defiled by Antiochus Epiphanes. And so new types of religion had come in, but had already kind of fossilized at that point. And Jesus was coming in and shattering a lot of that, which was why there was so much tension between Him and the Jewish religious sect at the time. All right? Now, on page 10, we've got a question here, and I know what you have written down, and I've got something else written. It says, when we slow down and contemplate the many details surrounding Jesus' birth, we begin to see the miraculous story unfolding. Has placing yourself inside the narrative, by the way of culture, history, landscape, and spiritual climate, led to any fresh insights? Well, we were talking about that earlier, and I decided to kind of do this question early, but what's your first reaction when you're kind of seeing some of this stuff? Especially, I think the whole idea that Jesus was the kataluma, when Jeremy was talking about the kataluma being the room at the top, but Jesus was actually, they could have had the whole event in the basement where all the cattle or where all the horses, where all the donkeys were, and that was just part of the house. It wasn't really an inn. So how's everyone feel about that when you kind of hear some of this stuff and it really starts to break it down? Boy, everyone is super quiet tonight. Go ahead, Karst. Go ahead. You know what? Oh, you know everyone's quiet? Yeah, thanks for throwing that in. You were surprised by the kataluma? Especially since the word for in the Greek was used like it's used in other places in the Scripture. And kataluma was also used. And so it makes you wonder sometimes, like, were the translators, did they get it wrong? Is this an issue of multiple generations of people? One person makes a mistake, and then, subsequent generations of the scriptures after that have problems in translation. I don't know. Veracity of the Bible, I think sometimes is a debate a lot of people want to get into by small issues like this. But a small issue like this can change our understanding of how things were. Go ahead.
And the Jubilee year, they went back because it was.
Yeah, it was Jubilee year. Yeah, census. Yeah, they had to do a census, and that's why. And here's the thing, it didn't matter where you were or how long you had been there. When that year hit, guess what? You're going back to your ancestral home, and you are doing something different. Now, wise people know this is coming, and they probably purchase a home back there before that year. People weren't just dumb and just didn't show up. They paid attention to what was going on, and that's why, I'm of the mind when I'm reading some of this and I'm looking at some of this, I'm of the mind Joseph probably purchased a house ahead of time, or at least had rented a home ahead of time, so that when they got there, they had a place to go to. It wasn't like you just showed up and had nowhere to go. And I think it helps lend to this fact that when the wise man came, they were still in the same place. Everyone understand what I'm saying? It wasn't, why would you stay in an inn for a year or two? If Jesus was a toddler by the time the wise men got there, you wouldn't. But if it's a Cataluma and you're staying in your same house, that tends to it makes the narrative make more sense to us from a human common sense standpoint. Am I right about that? Or am I crazy here, everybody? All right, we've had some responses. Kathy says, it's eye-opening to see the house and the barn as one. Gary says, it changes the way we think of Christmas and how it was done. Beth says, our English tradition says it was made 1,600 years after the fact that they were seeing it from the 16th century perspective. And that's true. A lot of how we view Christmas came from the 1600s, not really from the biblical account of things. Kathy says, and there were other people with them. She didn't understand that. Beth says, I find myself very invested in the story that I've heard all my life. Yeah, because it's actually giving you context for something you've never known before. All right, let's jump over to page 11. There's another set of questions here, and this one's going to get a little more, we can have a little more discussion. God sent his son in the fullness of time, Galatians chapter 4, verse 4. He intentionally chose the method of Jesus' arrival, the time and the place he would grow up in, and the people who would raise him, all for the purpose of saving humanity from sin and death and reconciling to himself. Now, I know you guys have the rest of this question, but I just want to ask the question up to this point. What can God's intentionality teach us? Question mark. Anything after that, just cross it out. What can God's intentionality teach us? Roger says because he's had a plan all along. He wanted each one of us. Anybody else? What do we learn, or what can God's intentionality teach us? He wants each one of us. He had a plan all along. Anybody else? Right. God has a plan, but there's a lot of details to the plan that we may not see. I want to just kind of put this idea out here for you guys at this Bible study tonight. That it isn't just Jesus that this God has intentionality about. It's all of us. I've heard people say to me at times, oh, if I was only born in the 1800s, or if I was only born in the 1700s, if I was only born in the Middle Ages. That discussion has come up all the time, and to me, I'm like, really? Because this is what I understand. God made you for right now. You young guys that are in here, listen to me. God made you for right now. He didn't make you for any other time but this time. That means if God made you for right now, He knows you. He knows your plan, and this goes for all of us. He knows you. He knows His plan for you, and the best place He could have ever placed you was right here, right now. The highest impact you can have in your life, the best you can do is right here, right now. I've got some verses. I want you to write these verses down. Oh, Leah says there's a promise of the kingdom, yes. Linda Frost says, yes, Roger, and we can feel more comfortable because He also has a plan for us. Now, I want you to write these verses down in that paragraph right there. Esther, chapter 4, verse 14. Listen to this, please. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your relatives will die. And then this is Mordecai talking to Esther, and he says, who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this. All right? Kathy says it's His perfect will for us and for the people in the time that we're talking about. Yes, that's true. I want you to take your Bible, go to Jeremiah chapter 1. Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5. Write that reference down. You can look it up later, but I'll read it to you now. I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb. Before you were born, I set you apart and appointed you as a prophet to the nations. So even before you were born, God already had the idea of you, or had the idea of Jeremiah, and He knew you were coming, and He already had a plan in place for Jeremiah at that time. And it's no different for anybody else. No different. Write this down, please. Psalm chapter 139. Psalm chapter 139, verses 13 and verse 16. And I'll go there and I'll read them. But Psalm chapter 139, verse 13 and verse 16. Listen, please. You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. That's verse 13. Verse 16 says, you saw me before I was born. Every day of my life is recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. Here's the Bible proving to us over and over and over again that every person that walks upon the face of the earth, He has a plan for. He intended for them to come into being. I've often said this in youth ministry. Over and over again, I found myself saying it. Because when I was in youth ministry, I came across a lot of students who their number one problem was their parents. Okay? In fact, in being youth ministry for a long time, and I've said it before, I'm going to say it till the day I die, 90% of our kids' problems are us, their parents. As a youth minister before, no one liked hearing that from me before I had kids, and they didn't like hearing it a whole lot even after I had kids, okay? But the reality is this. 90% of students' problems come directly from their parents because it's the environment and the people that are shaping them. It's a fact. It's a fact. And I would have parents look at me, and their kids would be coming to my youth group for a month. And I would go to the parent, knock on the front door, and say, hey, I'm Bill. Just so you know, your students have been coming on Wednesday night to our youth ministry. I want to put a face with a name if they've talked about it so that you understand they're safe, they're okay, it's all right. And I literally had this happen to me multitude of times. I don't give an F where they are as long as they're out of my hair. Okay? Multiple times this was said to me, to my face. Different communities, different cities I've worked in different places. I've had kids have no confidence in their life because they're illegitimate. I don't know my dad, I don't know my mom. I've had it come up over and over again. And I want all of you to know this. There's no illegitimate children in God's eyes. He plans every single one of them. They all have a purpose and a plan for such a time as this. There may be illegitimate parents, but there's no such thing as illegitimate child. God knows them. He knew them before they were born, and He knew the plan for their life. Now, they can make decisions that will better their life, make their life worse. Personal responsibility for your own decisions. We talked about that. But God has a plan for every person and a purpose for every person. It's who He is, it's what He does, it's how He cares about us, and it's why God's interested in us every single day. That's my sermonette on this, but you've got the scriptures that prove it right in front of you. I think we have one last question. No, we don't. That's it. That's the last question. It's 7:48. I know we can go. Does anyone have any questions that after hearing some of that stuff, and you say, hey, Pastor Bill, I would, can you answer this question for me? I'm here to do it. So anyone got a question about anything we covered tonight? We're good? All right, let's pray. Jesus, we love you. We thank you for being with us. We thank you for learning and teaching us. God, I pray that we would be able to go deeper in this series on your life, Lord. And that, God, we would understand the Bible better and understand your will better. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you guys.